What's the core issue right now in the region? The core issue in the region is Gaza, and it is the determination of the Israeli leadership to Gazify everything they want to own. In other words, whether it's southern Lebanon or most of Lebanon or southern Syria or most of Syria, wherever they go, the Gazification process has to be implemented first. So that's the issue. And you're not going to get any resolution. You're not going to get any end to this disaster until that's addressed. Now, how do you address that? Well, you've got to stop the Israelis from doing what they're doing on the West Bank right now, which is destroying villages, Christian, Muslim, doesn't make any difference to them. And you've got to regain control inside of Israel of everything going on inside the state. And right now, you've got Jewish militias operating independently, settlers, Israeli citizens. They are loosely affiliated with potentially elements of the Israeli Defense Force. But my point is it's no longer a unitary state as it was at the beginning. So that's a problem. And then finally, how do you solve anything unless you accept that some form of a Palestinian state has to exist? That's impossible. The Israelis have made it impossible. There can be no Palestinian state, and the Israelis are not going to integrate themselves or assimilate themselves into the rest of the Middle East. They've refused to do that in the past. They absolutely will not do it now. And frankly, I don't see how they can. How can you tell everyone who is your neighbor that they are subhuman, that they are animals, that they are unworthy of life, and then expect to be welcomed with open arms in the aftermath of some sort of new agreement that's signed by the President of the United States and whoever else? I don't see it happening. And, finally, you've got this Sykes-Picot background. From the standpoint of the people in the Middle East right now, they're looking at the Sykes-Picot agreement and they're saying that's over. And it's not just Israel that is part of this business of being over. It's everything. All these statelets in the Middle East, in the Arabian Peninsula primarily, they're not genuine nation states. They're artificial constructs. They're creatures of the First World War. That includes Israel, that includes Jordan, all of these places. This is the attitude among people living in the region. They say, we need change, and that means the elimination of these artificial constructs. Now, people say, well, that's impossible. That can't be done. It's been impossible to this point, but things are changing inside the region. And the attitudes of people that live there are changing. And the Turks and the Iranians are both sitting inside civilizational states. In other words, the Turks, this is the successor state to the Ottoman Empire. And Iran is the successor state to Persia. Both of these peoples are not in some sort of dilemma regarding who and what they are. They are not dependent upon foreign powers to come in and prop them up and ensure they continue to exist. I can only imagine what the leadership in Ankara or the leadership in Tehran privately thinks about what should be done in the Middle East. I'm sure they're all interested in the same thing. They all want the current status quo to go away. And that's the big problem. Now, the UAE understands that, and they're trying right now to set up new pipelines to keep them alive, so that they can avoid moving their oil out of the Middle East. Of course, the unhappy consequence of that is it has to cross Saudi Arabia or Oman. It already has a pipeline over Oman, but especially if it crosses Saudi Arabia, what happens? What does that mean? How do they handle it? Everybody is trying to find a way to keep existing, but it's going to be very tough after this thing is signed. Now, let's assume it is signed. Will it all break down? Well, probably. But if you're simply interested in getting out, if you want to disengage from everything, which I think privately is what President Trump wants to do, as far as he's concerned, it may not make any difference, Dan, because he can say, look, we did everything we could, and this is the best that we could come up with. If the people in the region refuse to come to terms with it, well, that's not my responsibility or our responsibility. And I think that kind of attitude could result in a signing and then ultimately of our disengagement from the region.
And yeah, I want to look at a little bit of some of the headwinds that are against that, because President Trump is being squeezed on all sides, as you alluded to a minute ago. He's being squeezed on the Israeli side. Obviously, we're going to see some other things that Netanyahu said in a second. He's also being squeezed, obviously, by the Iranian side, because they're trying to press for some really big issues, which will also, I'm going to show you some of the points of the leaked memo. But he's also being squeezed on the American side, and that's from some of his biggest otherwise supporters. Like Mark Levin, of course, who's a big-time supporter of the Israeli side, but he's been supporting Trump and everything until we get to here. You've also had Rebecca Heinrichs, who's saying, "Hey, we can't leave Israel behind." She posted something on her X account, and then one of the biggest people who's the most upset and putting the most pressure is Jack Keane.
Can't square some of the things that are coming out of the administration from reliable sources. That's what I find so disturbing. When I heard it from the Iranians, I dismissed it. I said, that's the same nonsense we were always hearing. Well, but when I hear from administration sources some of the things that you have heard of what's in this deal, that makes no sense whatsoever. It's not defensible. I think what the president should do is just let's release it and let people see what's out there, so we stop debating about something none of us has seen.
Yeah, I think it's pretty clear that he has seen it. That's why he's so up in arms here. But what do you make? Well, let's look at it in order here. What do you make of all the U.S. pressure on Trump not to have this MOU?
Oh, well, we talked about that earlier. That's permanent. That's not going to go away. I say permanent is probably stronger than ever. I'm sure that everybody from Paul Singer to Miriam Adelson to Larry Ellis, all of them who are deeply committed Israel firsters, are going to oppose this. And, you know, I don't know what you tell President Trump at this point. President Trump obviously thinks it's not in his political interest or in the interest of the American people that we be permanently embroiled in this mess. At least that's my perception. And so he wants this framework document. And I think they sense the possibility that the Israelis have pushed this too far, and that at some point people are going to say, well, we've had enough and we're leaving. And frankly, how can we avoid it? I mean, if we've learned one thing, we've learned that in this new warfare environment, the new technology of intelligence, surveillance, reconnaissance, and the multitude of precision-guided weapon systems, unmanned missiles, cruise missiles, so forth, we can't protect our allies. And that's sinking in not only in the Persian Gulf, but it's sinking in Europe and Northeast Asia and elsewhere. So all of the conditions that were conducive to this sort of massive investment in U.S. military hegemony by garrisoning states all along the periphery of Eurasia is over. That's stopping. I think that's being made clear to President Trump. If it hasn't, then I think he's found out on his own, because it's just not going to work. And that means this may be irreversible. Let's put it that way. If this is signed and we follow through with it, it may be irreversible, regardless of what the other two parties, Iran and Israel, ultimately do.
And let me then now go to the Israeli side here, because and as you're going to listen to here, this is Netanyahu talking about the good relationship he has with Trump. I think this is translated into English. But the interesting thing here, and I'd like you to discuss on the backside of this, is whether it's Netanyahu or whether it's all these war advocates here in the United States that say, keep going, let's keep fighting. They have to recognize what you just said about we can't do it. We can't protect against incoming Iranian fire. If it goes back to a hot war, we can't protect others. So it's literally self-destructive to go back into it. And yet that seems to be what they're asking for.
Trump and I have known each other for many years. We often see eye to eye, and there are also cases where we see less eye to eye. I am responsible for Israel's security interests. I stand up for them, not by being belligerent, and you have to do it wisely, and a lot of familiarity with the American arena. It requires a lot of experience. I think I do it in the best way possible, and when necessary, I stand firm for our security interests.
You know, I'd really, just kind of as an aside, I'd love to hear President Trump say the same thing. Yeah, I like Israel, but I'm going to stand for American security interests first. Netanyahu is going to do what you suggest. And the question is whether President Trump will or not. But if you could, from the military perspective, answer that question: why are all these people pushing for something that self-evidently we cannot accomplish militarily?
They cannot suspend their disbelief in the possibility that the force that we have built and have poured trillions of dollars into over the last 35, 40 years is no longer viable in the new warfighting environment. And I'm sure that that is the view of General Keane. This is always a problem. The senior officers have a great deal of difficulty dealing with new realities on the battlefield, new technologies, new ways to fight, new organizations. And so they tend to resist all of them on the grounds that it hasn't been proven. Well, you and I think it's been proven. I think a lot of other people have figured this out. We've learned a lot of important lessons from the war in Ukraine as well as the war in the Persian Gulf. I think the Persian Gulf is probably more stark because you have this terrain where there's nothing to conceal the explosions and the damage and the operations, whereas a lot of what goes on in Ukraine is opaque to us. In other words, we can't witness it as easily and as clearly as we can in the Middle East. So I'm not surprised that he probably feels that way. And he probably says, no, we have enough munitions, enough missiles, enough aircraft, and nobody's going to stop us. I mean, remember, we've heard this over and over and over again. Every time you bring up the Russians or the Chinese or the potential of their intervention, I'll forget that. That's irrelevant. They're never going to do anything. That, I think, is a very dangerous position to take. And I think that President Trump knows that's a dangerous position as well. There are a lot of other things happening. President Trump, I'm sure, has listened carefully to Mr. Erdogan. He has to. The Turks are a major power. He's listened to General Sisi in Egypt, very vulnerable, but he is still the leader of the largest Muslim Arab country in the world. So I think it's easy if your view of the world is through one very narrow prism. And that's the case with a lot of these people that are sort of unambiguous, permanent Israel firsters. But if you're the president of the United States, there's a lot more out there that you've got to take into it.
Well, there is a lot more. In fact, there's a lot more in this deal here. We've been talking about some big headwinds just with the Lebanese issue alone, and where the Iranians say in Lebanon, what the Hezbollah says in Lebanon, what Trump says in Lebanon, what Israel says in Lebanon. Just, I don't know how you square that one issue, but there's a lot of other issues in too. And in fact, apparently the Wall Street Journal is now also reporting on some of the leaked terms. So apparently some of the things we've been talking about are in fact in the U.S. version. Trump still has not yet read them out there. We'll get to that as soon as it does. But let's take a look at what else has been talked about here, because one of the things that has Mark Thiessen, who's has been a huge supporter of this continued war and has been really happy to kill however many Iranians is necessary. He puts out this morning here that the United States this is what he says is one of the terms. The United States undertakes, together with its regional partners, to create a comprehensive agreed plan by both parties for the rehabilitation and economic development of the Islamic Republic of Iran, while ensuring financing of at least $300 billion. Now, that's any way you want to square that one. That is reparations that only the losing side pays. And in fact, this is the terms here where that point is put out there. But let's just see, wherever that money, J.D. Vance was interviewed yesterday, and he tried to sidestep this and said, "Oh, well, come from somebody else. It won't come from the United States." And then I think today, Gene, I won't show you that video right now, but he answered, on that, said, "Well, I don't care where the money comes from. We cannot allow these guys to have that. But is there a way around it without giving them reparations if we don't get it signed?"
Well, first of all, let's be clear. Mark Thiessen, along with General Keane, have fully embraced the Israeli narrative that Iran is the sort of archdeacon in the church of Satan, that it is permanently evil, that its intentions are evil, that its society is evil, and therefore it must be destroyed. I mean, quite frankly, that's the way they look at it. That's why you keep hearing people say, bomb them again, bomb them again, bomb them again. I don't think President Trump privately believes that. In fact, I know from comments he's made in the past, I don't think he believes it. And I think he recognizes that there is a critical need for stability in the world right now, not chaos. And this war in the Persian Gulf has created financial, economic, strategic chaos. So, what do you say to somebody that insists? I mean, what if you were married to someone and all of your friends hated the person that you married and said terrible things about her? Well, you know her and you don't agree with that. So you have a choice. You can listen to all of your friends or you can stick with your wife. I mean, it's the same sort of thing. And I think President Trump is thoughtful enough that he knows that the things that Iran is being accused of are not valid. And he now knows that the Israelis are capable of things that neither he nor I nor many of us ever thought was possible. I certainly did not.
I didn't.
And so I don't think it works. And, Mark Thiessen's comments notwithstanding, it's a disaster if you're Netanyahu. It's a disaster if you're permanently committed to Israeli regional hegemony and international Jewish finance. But for the rest of us, no, it's not a disaster. And we have an interest in doing business with Iran, just as we have an interest in doing business with Russia and China and, frankly, everybody else.
Yeah, and that there's that Wall Street Journal headline we mentioned there. That's breaking news from their perspective here. That just came out when our show just came on the air here. And let's take a look at that point here from the terms that have been leaked here. The United States commits to ending on a schedule to be agreed upon as part of the final agreement all types of sanctions currently facing the Islamic Republic of Iran. Long list here, including resolution of the United Nations Security Council and the Board of Governors of International Atomic Energy Agency, and all unilateral sanctions, both primary and secondary. That is a huge list there, Doug, because you're talking about all the sanctions will be released. And the Iranians have been saying this has to be up front or there's no deal. And now here, at least if these terms are true, this is from our side now, then we're going to have to waive all that. And just can you imagine the heads exploding in Washington, D.C. if he actually does that, Trump, and waives those sanctions? Do you think he can get by with that?
Well, I think he's going to have trouble with the Congress, obviously, because they're still hip pocket of AIPAC, and they're going to rage against any lifting of sanctions on Iran, or for that matter, anybody else that the Israelis and the lobby don't like. But he's doing the right thing. Look, this is the past. I think President Trump is divorcing himself from this sort of self-defeating, self-destructive past that has characterized U.S. foreign and defense policy for 30, 40 years. We had an opportunity after 91, and it's certainly a big opportunity after 2001, to change directions in a number of ways. We didn't. We doubled down on all the stupid policies. We could have turned large numbers of countries into friends, and instead we turned them into opponents, or we alienated them. All of this business needs to go away. But that's not popular inside the Beltway. The Beltway likes the status quo. The Beltway likes the status quo that keeps the money flowing to the places where they want it to go. And what Trump started to do in his first term was to change that money flow. Then he abandoned it. Then he came on again. And initially he talked a great game, but he didn't do it. He failed in Ukraine. He's failed in Minneapolis. He's failed in so many places. Perhaps now at this point he's recognized, I'm I'm pushing up the wrong hill, and it's time to get off this particular hill and get onto a more level path into the future. I don't know. I don't know where he is right now, but he kind of conveys that impression to me.
And do you think that he has the wherewithal just emotionally to carry the day anymore with this, especially with all these folks that we just mentioned here? And there's a lot longer list of those people who are upset about a lot of those things. And one more issue, which I'll get to right after this. But the question is, can he bring his side into compliance to convince them? You've talked about so many times on our show in the past about how one of his biggest superpowers is his ability to spin anything and get people to believe something. But are we getting to the edge of that superpower? Can he actually convince these people to get on board with him if he goes down this MOU path?
Who controls our media, the mainstream media? How meaningful is that today? One of the things that I've learned over the last several months is how meaningless the mainstream media has become. You take someone like Tucker Carlson. People thought that he was a major figure in media when he was working at Fox. What is he today? A far greater, far more influential figure now that he is no longer at Fox than he was when he was with Fox. So I think the media picture has changed. I think there is alternative media. They're growing, and ultimately they are going to eclipse what we consider to be mainstream. Are we there yet? No, but we're moving in that direction. Is that going to be enough to help President Trump if he takes this path? That I don't know. The second thing is the anti-war sentiment in the United States is far more widespread than I think people realize. We don't have a draft. And most of the reasons for all the demonstrations during the Vietnam conflict, against the conflict, particularly after '68, were because of the draft. And it wasn't just because people didn't want to serve, but they began to realize the war made no sense and they didn't want to die pointlessly. Not an unreasonable position, correct? So I think that attitude is greater now inside the United States than certainly it has been since I saw it in the 1960s. And this time, it's a more reasoned attitude. It's not, I don't want to serve my country. No, that's not the issue at all. I'm not interested in going to some remote part of the world and sacrificing my life for a set of interests that I don't necessarily support or agree with as an American. So I think President Trump, depending upon how much energy he has, is in a position where he could make this work. But he definitely has an enormous number of enemies on the Hill, thanks to the lobby, that will fight against him tooth and nail about it.
And one final thing that has been one of the biggest sticking points, and this is one of the President Trump has painted himself into a corner on this one, is because he has ad nauseum tried to distinguish this from the Obama, the JCPOA deal, to say it's so much better, et cetera. And then he specifically has always mocked Obama for giving plane loads of cash, $1.7 billion, et cetera. And then now the Iranian side is saying they're going to have somewhere around $10 billion up front, or there's not going to be a deal. That's what they have said here recently. And here's now the sticking point here. This is point number 11 here at the bottom. It says, the United States undertakes that in light of the progress in negotiations toward a final agreement, frozen or restricted funds and assets to the Islamic Republic of Iran will be released and made fully available. They didn't put a number on there, so we don't know if it's 24 or something else. But according to this, we have committed to doing this. And so far, Vice President Vance has said, no, there's no money up front. President Trump said with Kristen Welker a week ago on Sunday, definitely no money up front. And now here this says money up front. How's he going to spend that one?
It's hard to tell, but I think he knows in the back of his mind that if he can make this work, particularly with Iran and the United States, and change, this state of almost permanent warfare in the Middle East, that he also has an opportunity afterwards to do something similar in Ukraine. The short time that I was with him, this is one thing I would say about him, is that I never saw interest in waging war. I just didn't. This was not somebody who set out to blow things up. He was willing to do it if he thought he had to, if he felt compelled to do so, but it wasn't something he wanted to do. If he can make this work, and this all depends on all the factors that we've discussed. He may not be able to bring the Israelis on board, and the Israelis may insist on going it alone. And there may not be a great deal that he can do about it, at least not initially. But if he can make it work between the United States and Iran and the rest of the region, then I think he has an opportunity to do something similar with Russia, Ukraine, and Eastern Europe. And that would be a tremendous achievement. And we shouldn't write it off as impossible at all. It all depends on him. Can he stay the course? And can he hold, support together to make it work? I think he can do it, but it depends on things over which neither he nor I have a great deal of control right now.